I'll just say a little bit about our two authors here. Nancy is, I got to know her through the Harvey County Resource Council a little bit. She is the director now of it's the Caring Place, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the Caring Place in Newton, which is a peer-led support group for people, consumers of mental health services, is I think how you put it. And yeah, and I'll let you guys can tell us some more about yourselves as well. And then Nathan here, he has a PhD in community psychology, and I think he just told me that he teaches at Butler Community College as well as Wichita State. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you two now, and I'll just say I think we're going to do Q&A after your guys' talk part of it. So those of you that might have questions, those of you on Zoom, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom that you can use to type your questions, and feel free to type those anytime, and then we'll save them for the Q&A time. And the same with you on Facebook. You can type your questions in the chat, and I will see them here and give them to Nathan and Nancy. So take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited that I get to speak about my book here in Newton, Kansas. I haven't talked about my book in a while, so I'm a little rusty. But I want to share it with you because I think it's an important story, and it can help anyone who struggles with mental illness. It also can help people who have a story to tell and is scared to share it. And so maybe a little history first about how this all started. After the worst thing that happened in my life, I was up in Topeka at the State House trying to get a law passed. That was in 2006. And a lot of the representatives and other people would always come up to me and say, hey, you should write a book about all this. You should really write a book. Well, I wasn't really good in school, especially when it came to spelling and writing and English. So it was a dream of mine, but I didn't know how to write it. And so then there was a couple people who wanted to write my story and the worst thing that happened in my life and other people's life in Newton, Kansas. But I didn't want to make the story all about that. So Nathan and I, we worked together at the Center for Community Support and Research. It's part of WSU. And we were in the same team together. We were in the Certified Peer Specialist team, which I will talk about later. And one day I just was kind of discouraged. I was ready. I wanted someone to help me to write it. And I knew that Nathan was really busy and he had a lot on his plate. And yet he was really interested in my story. We talked a lot. And so I asked him, and he said yes. And so that happened like in 2011, maybe the end of 2010. But anyway, we started meeting every other week at different places. And Nathan made it real easy because he would ask me questions and I would answer him. And then that went on for about 2 years. We had a couple hiccups in the process. I was going through a really hard time. And that's in the book too. And so sometimes we didn't meet all the time. And so it took a little while. But in June of 2013, this book came out. And I'll let Nathan talk a little bit about the foreword and and just his thoughts about writing it.
So the first thing that I think of is that the cover. It's been a while since I've looked at it, and I kind of forgot about that picture. It's of a tree that fell down and then grew straight back up. And I thought that was very appropriate for this, because there was such a interesting development as far as sort of where you came from, and then where you ended up, and where you've ended up even now is even more like straight up from that bend that happened, that as you say, was the worst thing that ever happened in your life and in several people's lives. And that was the thing about it for me, is that I'm not particularly creative, and so having the story right there made it very easy to tell a story. It was really just going back to the basics of college composition, just create an outline and follow through on it. And because the story was so much there to tell. And so it was, yeah, that's a pretty good description of it. We took about 2 years. I was posing questions and she would answer them, and I would be typing. I usually had an audio recorder in case I missed things that I was typing, and I'd go back and listen to that when I needed to. And there were things that in hindsight I wish I had done. I wish I had gone to Canyon City, because I didn't have a picture in my head of what that part of the country looks like. And if I had been able to fold that into the story, I think it might have been more eye-catching, because it's a tremendously beautiful part of the country, which would have been a nice juxtaposition against this storyline. I think, can I just quickly plug my newest book? Phase 2. I tried to write a science fiction story. It's another self-published book. But I'm just tonight I'm here to support Nancy. Is that pretty much what I needed to say?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. So this story starts in Canyon City, Colorado, which is on Highway 50 in the valley in Colorado, mountains all around it. It's a really small town still. It's a really small town. And I grew up there. And this story starts with my walk of faith. It starts in a church, and it starts as a child understanding as much as they can about Sunday school and church, and it talks about my family life. Coming from a small town, everybody knows everybody, and my mom especially was a RN at the only hospital in Canyon City. She was head nurse of the ER for a while, and she was head nurse of the medical wing upstairs, and she was head nurse of the recovery unit after you have an operation. So people knew her in this town. And my dad, he worked at different places, but he finally settled at being a maintenance man in the hospital. So again, everyone knew my folks. So we write about me growing up in Canyon City. We write about how it was going to grade school and junior high school and high school. Back then it was grade school went until 6th grade, and then you had 7th, 8th, and 9th, that's junior high, and then you had the high school 10th, 11th, and 12th. And And we talk about that. We talk about how my mom and dad met, how my mom was upper class and and my dad was poor. How my mom went all the way to become a 4-year RN, and my dad never finished high school. He grew up in Leadville, Colorado, and that's where they met, in Leadville, Colorado. Can you imagine that? Someone from Oklahoma City coming to Colorado to see the beautiful mountains and meeting someone at the hotel. My dad was a bellboy when my mom and him met. My mom came from a family that was, well, she didn't have to worry about anything. Everything was provided for her. But my dad, he had like 6 or 7 sisters, and he was next to the youngest. And they were dirt poor, and they were minors in Leadville. So we talk about that. We talk about the difference between my grandparents on my dad's side and on my mom's side. And that was all important because it tied in to who made me and why I was who I was. But it wasn't until junior high school when my mental illness, if you want to call it that, started to happen. And it started to get so bad that the school counselor back then told my mom, maybe Nancy needs to see somebody. But you know that generation, right? This was in the 60s and 70s. So my mom's generation, what happens in the house stays in the house. And we don't talk about family secrets. And so that's what it was. That was what it was for a long time. That's what it was a family secret. That was kind of like when The Girl Who Cried Wolf started in the very beginning. I was being abused by my dad and my brother, and my mom couldn't believe it. And I didn't know it was abuse. And that happens to girls, ladies. Sometimes we don't know it's abuse. And I didn't know it was abuse until one night I had been sexually molested by the old man across the street. And I came home and told my parents, and my dad got really mad. Couldn't figure out. Mr. Kelly was doing the same thing you were doing, Dad. Why are you all mad? So anyway, going on, I talk about growing up. I talk about grade school and junior high and high school. I talk about the teachers I had back then, some good, some not so good. I talk about how I started really embarrassing my mom, not meaning to. Like, we went to a football game and to see, we had family friends, and their son played on the high school team and he got hurt. And I'm just a caring person, even back then. And I made a big poster and took it to the high school and gave it to him and all this. And well, of course, embarrassed him, a 7th grader coming to the high school to a senior and doing that. And it got so bad that it kind of broke up the friendship. And that was the beginning of my mom being very angry at me because I was a disappointment. I wasn't going to be the daughter that was going to become a nurse. I was lucky to get C's. And I was someone who, in some ways, she was afraid of. See, my dad had 2 sisters who back then ended up being committed to the state hospital in Pueblo, Colorado. And I remember my mom always telling me, you better straighten up, girl, or you're going to end up just like them. Well, the story goes on, and in 75, I come out here to Wichita, Kansas to be with an aunt. Well, she was my cousin, but more like an aunt. And that in 76, that's when I read the book, Living in a World Falling Apart. And I heard about communal living in a faith-based place. And that's when I went to Newton to be part of New Creation Fellowship. Back then, this was in 76 to 79, we had households and we had a common treasury. They wanted to live out the chapter Acts in the Bible, the book of Acts in the Bible. So from 76 to 79, I lived in Newton, Kansas in this New Creation Fellowship. But that wasn't really a good fit for me. I talk about that in the book. So I left and I went back to Canyon in 79. During that time, I got married and I got divorced. And I was kind of promiscuous back then. And I got myself pregnant and I had an abortion. Not because I wanted to have an abortion, but because my mother, the nurse, didn't want the embarrassment of having her daughter be pregnant. And so the only way that I would receive her love and her whatever I needed was if I had an abortion. And she found a doctor, and that happened. But the guilt of doing that, and then running into the father of the baby and him telling me he wanted it, I fell apart. My mental illness got so much worse that I did end up in the state hospital in Pueblo, Colorado. And because of that, my mom had won. It happened. So that took a lot out of me. And so in 1984, I came back to Newton. I came back to the church. That was the only reason why I came back to Kansas, was to be a part of New Creation Fellowship Church. Households were no longer, common treasury was no longer. People I had known in the past moved on. New people were there. And they didn't want to make the same mistakes that they felt they made the first time. So they wanted me to go to Prairie View. So in the book, I talk about Prairie View. I talk about everyone I worked with. I talk about how in the 80s, I was at Prairie View. I was either an inpatient or a day hospital patient. Now they call it partial hospital, but it was nothing like it used to be. We used all the grounds of the campus. We used everything. It was good. It was a safe place, and you could stay there until you felt better. It wasn't like 3 days and you're out like sometimes it is now. Anyway, so I talk about Prairie View. I talk about being in and out. I talk about how I was burning out the church. So in 1986, my church and Prairie View decided that I needed to go into Kaufman House at 321 West 7th. Still standing. And I went through a really hard time there, and I'm not going into details because I want you to read the book. but it was a really bad time. And I told my church what was going on at Kaufman House. No, they couldn't believe it. Plus, see, Kaufman talked to them. Kaufman would talk to your significant others or your parents, whoever you had in your life that was there for you. He would go to them, and in my case, he would tell New Creation, hey, you know, she is just making it something that's not, and she's just not being compliant. And, you know, she just wants to be with you guys, and she'll burn you out. And my treatment might be a little radical compared to Prairie View, but it'll help her. So of course they believed him over me. So I told Prairie View. And one night I thought, after I had told Prairie View, that the next morning Prairie View and the cops would come and they would get us all out, not just me. But instead they called Kaufman and they told Kaufman what I had said. After that, I never got to see Prairie View again until I got out. Of course, when I got out, I was definitely sicker than I ever was before I went in. And so I write about that. I write about how it was hard. Because, see, he wouldn't leave me alone. He wouldn't leave the church alone. For example, one night I was having Bible study. I had lost my job and at Peabody Nursing Home. And I had lost my job. That was really scary for me because, see, he told me 5 things. He told me I should never get married. I should never have children. I couldn't hold down a job. I would burn out any church I ever went to. And I would burn out the system. So when I lost my job, I really struggled with that. So one night I'm at Bible study and he calls the place where I'm at. And he tells the leader, Norm, hey, if Nancy would come back to Kaufman House, she could have her job back. Well, of course, you know, I was sick. I got sicker. Got so sick that I tried committing suicide a couple times. And so I was sent to St. Francis Hospital. And again, Kaufman got involved. And the church said, Nancy, you need to go back to Kaufman House. We can't support you, not financially, but, you know, support you unless you go back to Kaufman House. I didn't. Again, I was getting worse. And so my therapist at Prairie View put me in Meadowlark. So we talked about that a little bit. Well, that wasn't going to work. So I decided to go back to Colorado. I went back to Colorado. I got married. I had a child. I had a wonderful job. And yet I couldn't put into words what was happening to me. Every time my kids said, I hate you, I heard Kaufman. Every time there was a problem in my marriage, I heard Kaufman. So I was still sick and struggling. The book talks about that. But in December of 2004, Christmas even, I get a phone call from someone at New Creation telling me that the Kaufmans got arrested. They're in jail. And everyone who was in that house is safe. So next year, I testified. I came back to Wichita and I testified at the federal trial of Arlan and Linda Kaufman. I was the first victim to testify, not because I had been there all that 20 years, but I laid the foundation. I told them how it was like in the beginning in 1986. And had they believed me in 1986 and closed him down, all the horrible things that had happened before then, after that, would never happen. And I wasn't believed because I was a mental patient. At the trial, I had to wait 18 years. I had to wait 18 years to be believed. Just believed. But then I got vindicated and validated. At the trial, so Nathan writes it so beautiful. We used the transcript of my testimony, and Nathan really makes it into a conversation piece. We just didn't put the transcript out there. Really made it a conversation piece between the lawyers and me. Then right after that, I went home. I went back to Colorado. That was in October of 2005 when I testified. But in December, I realized that I needed to come back to Wichita. So I came back to Wichita to live. In January at the sentencing, which was horrible, at the sentencing, after the sentencing, I had said, you know, something more has to be done. There's more Kaufman houses out there, and something has to be done. So in January to June, well, May of that year, my friend and I spent a lot of time at the state capitol, knocking on doors, saying, please pass this law, which would stop a Kaufman House from ever going on for 20 years. And we won. It was so neat to be in both houses, the state Senate and the rep, and see unanimous voting, yes, to get this bill passed. And it was because we never went away. So if you have a story to tell and you go up to the state house because you want something changed, don't tell them once. Tell them every day what they need to do, and it will work. Anyway, so then I go to California because I won the Voice Award. Lynn and I win the Voice Award. And during that time, Mariel Hammerway was the MC. And she heard our stories as we talked about thinking about the award and what the award meant. And so after it was over, we were just hanging around, and she came and talked to us. I mean, she really talked to us. She didn't act like a movie star. She really talked to us. She wanted to know how we dealt with depression, how we go on from a bad experience like that. It was an awesome experience. That's in the book. The biggest thing was so I went to a recovery conference in 2007. First time I heard the word recovery. You don't hear the word recovery. All these years, never heard the word recovery. I got a job working at the time with Self-Help Network, and then it turned into CCSR, Center for Community Support and Research. During that time, I learned about CROs, consumer-run organizations, what Caring Place is. I then got trained as a certified peer specialist. What that is can you imagine someone with mental illness being able to work in the center, a mental health center, helping other peers know that recovery is possible. And let me share with you, I lost the page. Oh no, share with you what really changed my life from learning about recovery. What recovery really is gaining a sense of control over my life and the direction I would like it to go following the diagnosis of mental illness and all the losses associated with that. That came from the Appalachian Consulting Group that did the curriculum for certified peer specialists back in 2008 or 9. I don't remember the year, Nathan, but it came back then, and that changed my life. And I became a trainer, and I trained peers all over Kansas. And I was the recovery can happen. You learn new tools, and you know that there's a life on the other side of the diagnosis. It's wonderful. And that's when I asked Nathan if he would help me write it. I'm writing another book, real quick for my plug. I'm writing another book talking about what had happened since 2013 to now, working at caring places, a full circle. I mean, what happened to me is only a block away. And so Nathan, do you have anything to say?
Well, since you bring up Appalachian, I really should have given them credit for somewhere in, I think even the opening line is, "I have a story to tell," which was directly lifted from them. And like, I didn't even give them credit. Really, really poor author move there. So at least in this audience, I can redeem myself. Like, sorry. But yeah, that was, without that connection, you and I wouldn't have met and wouldn't have bonded in such a way that it was clear that it was possible for us to work together for that period of time and make this book a reality.
So I guess I'm ready for questions or comments.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. It's a really powerful story, and appreciate you telling it to us. And Lee Penner wrote, "Nancy, thank you for your willingness to share your story. Your story will help others suffering from trauma, abuse, and mental illness." And I think that is definitely true. And I know that I can't wait to read your new book, because it sounds like it'll talk about how you've helped so many people in the years since the period covered in this book. So those of you who might have questions, or you can type them use the Q&A button on Zoom, or I've got Facebook pulled up here and I can see your questions there as well. So feel free to type them.
I want to make another plug while we're waiting for some questions. This book, A Very Private Residence, Kathy Conrad, who grew up in Heston, went to Bethel College. I think she had a family member or something that worked at Prairie View. She uses the transcript, and she makes a story out of using the transcript. Every day of the trial, she says what happened, and then her thoughts about it. And it's a very powerful if there's any question of what happened, if there's any question of if it was a conspiracy or how could someone do that. I think after you read my book and this book, you can see how a person can do that. One thing about my new book is it will talk about giving Linda Kaufman a compassion release. It will, after this book talks about giving her more time in 2009, my new book will talk about how I gave her a compassion release. I was the only survivor that did that. My new book will talk about how I went to Washington, D.C. and I spoke at a congressional hearing. And I shared my story there.
Wow.
So, yes.
Yeah, let's turn on. Yes, thank you. Yeah, we've got some questions that have come in. Well, first I'll read them. A comment from Jeannie Hauser. She said, just want to comment, it's just so good to hear this whole story again. Well done. I appreciate your courage. So thank you, Jeannie. And let's see, then Elizabeth has a question. Nancy, is there anything specific you'd like current folks struggling with mental health issues to know? You seem like you have an amazing amount of resilience and hopefulness.
Good question. I want them to know that the diagnosis of mental illness is what the system has to do. But what we go through is really trauma, and how we cope with the trauma, behaviors and stuff. And so I want them to know that what they went through, how it doesn't matter. Trauma is trauma. No one gets to name what it is. And I want them to know that there is life on the other side of that diagnosis. And that, yes, sometimes you lose a lot. You lose the opportunity to go to school. You lose the opportunity to get a job. You might lose friends. You might lose family because they don't understand and your illness burns them out. And yet, if you have the hope, and the hope is the ability and the opportunity, you have to have hope. You have to have that ability and opportunity. And I will say that you need to surround yourself with people who love you and doesn't get stuck on the diagnosis, and they love you, and they give you those opportunities. I think that recovery is not a destination. I want to make that clear. It's not a destination. It's a process. There are some tools that changed my life. The Wellness Recovery Action Plan by Mary Ellen Kaufman changed my life. Common Ground, Patricia Deacon, changed my life. Things I learned in certified peer specialist training, like facing your fears and dissatisfaction, something just I forget, Nathan. Dissatisfaction is a way to change catching your thoughts. catch it, check it, and change it. There's many little tools. I would say if there's anyone here that is over 18 and has a mental illness, come down to Caring Place. And we do have recovery orientated classes that would love to share with you.
Yeah. And what are when is Caring Place open? Could you let us know that?
Yeah, Caring Place is open Monday, Thursday, and Friday evenings from 6:30 to 9, and on Saturdays and Sundays 2 to 5.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I learned a bit about this during Research Council. It seems like an amazing resource and a group for people to support each other. Let's see here, Lee. Lee asked, what was the most significant turning point in your personal recovery? When did you realize that you were going to make it?
Wow. I think it started when I was finally believed, when I was finally vindicated. You know, during the trial, I wasn't treated as a mental patient. After the trial, I wasn't treated as a mental patient. I was treated as someone that went through a really hard time, a really bad place. And that was something new to me, because I had always been treated as something different. And people had to rescue me, and people had to help me. And at the trial, I wasn't treated like that. And I think that the next thing was going up to the State House and having people listen to me. I was now being listened to. I was now taken seriously, which before I was never listened to or taken seriously. It would, I had a mental illness. I think it was also hearing about recovery at a recovery conference. Recovery conference, we still have them. A recovery conference is peer-led and peer-ran. There's no mental health centers over a recovery conference. There's no mental health center even over Caring Place or other consumer-run organizations. It's people with mental illness running things and being together. And I think being around people with like-mindedness and knowing that it's okay, we're not as bad as we thought we were. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Let's see, we have another question about the Caring Place. I'd love to hear some more. Could you talk a bit more about how the Caring Place helps people in Newton who are in with recovery or just need support, and then how can we as a community come alongside to support the Caring Place?
Ooh, wow! Thank you for that question. Okay, so Caring Place, by the way, is going to be celebrating their 51st anniversary. It started in 1971 by Prairie View, and now Caring Place is ran and led by peers, people that have a diagnosis of mental illness. Usually the primary diagnosis, and Caring Place helps those who might be isolating. The whole start of Caring Place was kind of like the reason why the hours are the way they are is, okay, well, after after Prairie View closes, then if you needed to come and spend time with people, you could come to Caring Place. And so that's kind of like how it started. And we have a state grant that funds us to have the place, to run the place. And so we have group activities. We have rides. Like if someone wanted to come to Caring Place, but they didn't have any transportation, we can come get you. We also have where people who come kind of buy into it. You know, it becomes theirs. We have a membership that you sign after 3 times. If you come, you pay $1 a month to be a part. You buy your own snacks. We have snacks and you buy your snacks. But it's also a place just to come and not really hang out, but to learn something and just the peer support back and forth, getting to know each other. I think the way the community could help Caring Place is we definitely have some dreams. We have a wish list that we wish we could get some things from. Supporting us by partnering with us in things. Caring Place has been around for 51 years in Newton, Kansas, and it's had good times and it has some bad times, but it's always been here. And we want to be a resource for those people struggling with mental illness to know that they're not alone. The only thing is you have to be 18 and over, and we don't allow children. You also can become a board member. You can also become a board director. You can also learn to be an executive director like me. So there's lots of opportunities for people with mental illness at Caring Place, and there's also a lot of opportunities for the community to support us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Nadine has a question, and I think Nathan, you said that you might want to speak to this. She wrote, my understanding is that there remain some people in the Newton community that continue to disbelieve what happened. What are your thoughts about how to help people believe what happened?
It's a very strange thing, people choosing opinion over facts. But I mean, I'm a psychologist, and I can kind of see some of the ways that people don't want to. They want to justify what they believe rather than believe what is uncomfortable for them. So really, there's no simple answer to this. The hard answer is increase critical thinking. And the only thing that I know of to recommend that a person can do on a individual level is to use the Socratic method in a situation like that, and begin to ask the questions that point to the mistruth. Make the person justify what it is that they think that they believe and how they back that up, and question the sources, because they're not using a source like our book or the book that Nancy promoted earlier, that is based on the data that's there, the trial. So I wish there was some like magic pill, but I think the Socratic method is about the best thing that I can recommend on that individual level. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I have a question. Maybe, and both of you would have, I think, a perspective on this. You know, I mean, and it was great to hear Nancy talking about how she advocated for the legislation in Kansas legislature that was passed. So, what do you think of the mental health services landscape now? You know, could something like what happened at the Kaufman House happen again, or is happening or happen again, or how have things improved or not improved?
So Nathan, you want me to go first? Can I? Okay. So yes, Kaufman House can happen again. Kaufman opened Bethel College social work department. So he knew how to talk to people. He knew how to get them to believe him. I think it can happen in a smaller community. I think that I think that the system right now, of course, we're all doing the best we can. For me, as a survivor of Kaufman House, I'm going to be very blunt here. It would help me a great deal if Prairie View would apologize for not believing even after I told and sending people there. It would, I think in the community of Newton, I'm just going to speak about the community of Newton, would the mental health system, Prairie View is a, I am so grateful for Prairie View in my life. I am grateful for Prairie View is here in Newton, Kansas. I am grateful for the history of Prairie View. I think Prairie View is doing the best they can, but I think that if mental health centers would partner with people, peers like myself, and let them help the peers, certified peer specialists, if they would hire certified peer specialists, they do get Medicaid dollars. If they would hire them and let them work with the peers, that would be great. If the consumer, the peer, had more a voice in the system, that would help the system. In Newton, Kansas, you know, there is still survivors of Kaufman House and family members of people who lived at Kaufman House. It would be great if the city tore down the house.
Nancy, the
Sorry.
law that you got passed, is this the law that you got passed? Is it still in effect? Has it been weakened? I think
It has. Okay, so it has been weakened, but now it's at the Disability Rights Center. So if you're being abused, neglected, exploited, you can call the Disability Rights Center and they will help you. See, the Disability Rights Center is what stopped Kaufman House. It was not the state. The state didn't do anything. It was PAMI, which stands for the Protective and Advocacy of Folks with Mental Illness. That is what stopped Kaufman, because they were allowed to go into Kaufman House and get the victim of the videotapes and get her out and then ask questions. And so I think if people would call the Disability Rights Center more when they think there's an abuse with someone with a disability, that is what will stop the abuse and the neglect. Thank you, Nathan, for letting me go there.
Yes, thank you. And then Rhonda had a comment. She said, I'm happy for your ability to share your amazing story. You are obviously doing so much in your community at large. Thank you. And then she wished you continued successes. So thank you for that, Rhonda. I think we're about to 8 o'clock. So if anybody has a last minute question, go ahead and type it quick. But again, the book is The Girl Who Cried Wolf. And I've read a good portion of it now, and it's really well written, I think. And it's a hard to read. Parts of it are kind of hard to read, very, very tough stuff, but it's a really powerful story and inspiring to see you sitting before us, having survived all this, Nancy, and yeah. So
I do want to say that Faith and Life has copies of the book, and you can get the book from Amazon on Kindle and hard copy. And I can you put my email in the chat or someplace? If you want a signed copy, email me and we can talk about it, and I can send you a signed copy.
Yes, let me find your. Is it Nancy Jensen at gmail.com? I'm trying to.
Nancy Jensen 35 at gmail.com.
Okay, thanks. So I will send that to everyone. Type that in. So you'll email address is in the chat, and I'll put it on the Facebook chat as well. And well, thank you again. And Nancy, can't wait to of course see you. Hopefully I'll see you on Thursday for the Resource Council meeting. And can't wait to work with Caring Place and you in the future, and can't wait to have you back for another talk when your next book comes out. And you too, Nathan, maybe we should do a talk on your science fiction book. That'd be fun.
That would be fun. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I will sign us off now. And if I would say this, this is going to be on Facebook. If you want to watch it later or send it to anybody, it'll be on Facebook right away. And then in the next few days, I'll get it on our YouTube channel as well. If you want to send the recording will be available. So bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.